Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Triple Threat Podcast. I am your host, Cooper Miller, where we focus on news, education, and sports. Today, I have a very special guest, Mr. Benjamin Allen. He's running for the first judicial district here in Shoshone County, and we'll hop into it right now. My first question for you, Ben, is what is a district judge, and how does it compare to other types of judges in Idaho?
Perfect. Well, thanks, Cooper, for having me, first and foremost. The question you started us off with is a great question that I think a lot of people within the community may not know the answer to, and I think it's a good one to just give us a baseline for what we're probably going to be discussing most of the day today, and that is the upcoming judicial election. So the election that I'm running for is for the district judge here in the first judicial district that's going to be seated in Shoshone County specifically. In Idaho, we have essentially two types of courts. So we have what's known as a trial court, and then we have an appellate court. And our courts are broken up within those two categories. At the trial court level, we have magistrate courts and district courts. So those are the types of courts that you would envision as a citizen actually going into, watching a case be heard, whether it's an infraction because you got a speeding ticket, whether it's a civil matter because there's some sort of dispute over a contract, for instance. That's something that oftentimes might bring people within the court system. So those are going to happen in the trial courts. So those will be in either a magistrate court or a district court. A magistrate court is going to hear cases that are on the criminal side of things, an infraction or a misdemeanor. On the civil side of things, it's going to be civil disputes of nominal amounts. It also hears family law cases, child protective actions, juvenile matters, etc. The district courts are the courts that are going to hear your major criminal cases. So those are going to be your felony cases, are going to go up to the district court. It's also going to handle civil cases of high dollar amounts. So your big civil disputes, those are going to go to the district court. Now the other type of court is an appellate court. And when we think of appellate courts, most of the time we think of our Court of Appeals or our Supreme Court. But the district court is unique in that it is both a trial court and it's an appellate court. So it's a trial court for the things that I just stated, but it's an appellate court if there is a matter which starts in the magistrate division and an aggrieved party does not like the decision that was ultimately rendered by the magistrate judge. They reserve the right, in most instances, to be able to appeal that case. And when they appeal it, they're actually appealing it to the district court. So in those instances, the district court is actually going to sit in an appellate capacity to hear those appeals.
Right. So many people here at Wallace, of course, familiar with Mrs. Keisha Stutsky. She's an assistant coach for our girls team. From my understanding, she'd be a magistrate judge.
Correct. So, and on the bench, she goes by Judge Oxendine. So Judge Oxendine is going to be our sitting magistrate judge in Shoshone County. Our sitting district judge in Shoshone County is a judge by the name of Judge Barbara Duggan. And Judge Duggan is who is retiring. So that's what's creating this vacancy. And the timing of this vacancy is what's putting this matter on the ballot for decision by the voters.
Okay. So we'll move into our second question here. So what made you want to run for the position as district judge for Shoshone County?
Yeah, so the answer to that question dates back a number of years. I've always desired to serve in a public capacity. It's one of the reasons why I was drawn to the prosecuting attorney's office. It's why I currently serve in the elected capacity as the prosecuting attorney for Shoshone County. And the logical extension of that really is to move to the bench and have the ability to make decisions for our community that are going to be impactful and are going to guide the direction of our community moving forward. Those decisions that our judges make, oftentimes as a community, those are going to be the ones that the community really is going to look to say we need the discretion and the guidance of somebody sitting on the bench that's going to look at the set of facts that are presented before them, apply the law to those facts, and render an opinion that's fair, unbiased, and is going to be an opinion that is going to ultimately set precedent within this jurisdiction. For me, I think the goal of being a judge has always been a goal. It's always been something that I've looked at in the course of my career. And I've said, where do I want to be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? And at some point on that continuum, I envision having the ability to serve on the bench within this community. with Judge Oxendine having recently been appointed to the magistrate bench, that judicial seat in Shoshone County is taken. And so as we analyzed, where might we fit in, it really was the district court level that was going to be the logical opening. And that opening is now. And since that door is open, our team and our group that has really been supportive of me sitting in that capacity has jumped right in, has put together our campaign, and has said, we're going to go out in the community and we're going to demonstrate to the community that we want to be serving this community within that role moving forward.
Absolutely. And you described kind of what a district judge does and what a district court handles. But for those who aren't familiar with the position, what would your day-to-day responsibilities be as a district judge in the First Judicial District?
Yeah, so a judge at any level is going to spend a lot of time reading. There's lots and lots of case files that are going to come across the judge's desk. Every one of those case files is going to have court filings. It's going to have reports. It's going to have evaluations. It's going to have, motions and proposed orders, and all of that stuff is written documentation that a judge is going to have to comb through. So if you're asking the question, what is the day-to-day job of a judge look like, I'd start first and foremost with saying judges do a lot of reading. There's a lot of time spent in the office, spent sitting at a desk, combing through those case files. From there are court hearings, and those court hearings are much more frequent at the magistrate level. The district court level, case files tend to be much bigger. Court hearings tend to be less frequent, right? So you have a smaller number of cases, but the complexity or severity of those cases increases. So, the best way I can describe the day-to-day functions of a district judge is probably through comparison between a district judge and a magistrate judge, and that is your magistrate judge has a lot more opportunities to be hands-on. They might have a docket where they've got infraction cases that don't even have a formal case file or any filings in them. They might have a officer citation, and they'll have a long list of people's names that are set for court that day. And so they might see a lot more cases in any given week than a district judge would. When the district judge approaches the bench, they're doing so with the understanding that the complexity of those cases are much more significant, and therefore they're going to need to spend a lot more time behind closed doors going through those case files, reading, reviewing, drafting proposed orders, written decisions, things like that, and they're going to have less time in the courtroom. With that said, in Shoshone County, our district court has what you would consider court proceedings, typically 1 to 2 days a week here, and we have a set number of days each month that are dedicated to actual trials. On those trial dates, there's not going to be any other types of hearings. The only matter that's going to be on the docket is the matter that's going to be summoning in jurors to sit, hear a case, and ultimately decide on a verdict for that case.
Okay. And moving more into the ethics of being a judge, judges often see people on their toughest days. How do you maintain a productive, safe environment while dealing with high stakes or emotionally charged cases?
Judges certainly do. The vast majority of individuals in our society may only go into a courtroom a few times in their lives. For a lot of individuals, what brings them into the courtroom is situations that are uncomfortable, they're situations that are traumatic, and they're situations that are impactful. And although as an attorney, I obviously get to be in the courtroom very often, most people in our community are not going to have that opportunity. So when they are in the courtroom, that opportunity for them is going to be an experience that is going to often be shaped or molded by their interactions with that judge. In other words, that judge is going to be the face of the courtroom for most individuals that are brought before the court. Now, if that individual is a defendant, if they're a witness, if they're a victim, or if they're a juror, those circumstances may shape their perspective of that courtroom. Obviously, some of those roles have the ability to be much more traumatic or impactful. As a juror, perhaps not as exciting especially considering when individuals are summoned in for jury duty, there's a large number of individuals that are brought into the courtroom. Only a handful of them will actually sit on the jury. So a lot of those people will come into the courtroom for a few hours. They'll go through the jury selection process, and then they'll get sent home, right? So perhaps in that category of individuals, you don't have an opportunity to see a whole lot of interactions within the courtroom that are of significance. The individuals that are ultimately selected to sit on the jury and to hear a case, I think that's where you start moving into that realm of impact, where the individuals hearing that case, having to render an ultimate verdict at the end of a trial. I think if you sat down with those individuals and you had a discussion, I think most people would tell you that experience is impactful to them. So we take that, we circle back to the root of your question, which is how do you ensure that the courtroom is a safe and productive environment for individuals. I think that it starts and ends with the judge recognizing that they are the face of that courtroom. When they have that realization, I think you approach your position as the judge, ensuring that every person that walks through that courtroom feels as if they were treated with respect, that they felt the process was fair, and that at the end of the day, whatever shape or form justice takes, they would feel like justice was served. And in some instances, maybe that feeling of justice is an ultimate verdict in a civil case that results in a judgment. Maybe it's a verdict of acquittal. Maybe it's a verdict where you felt like there was a victim in a matter, and that victim is going to have some semblance of equity come out of that case. So I think that those goals as a judge, being in the back of your mind when you sit on the bench, I think is really going to be the impetus for people feeling like their experience in the courtroom was a positive one, was a productive one, and was a fair one, depending on their circumstance.
Right, and let's zoom in a little bit and talk about District 1 as a specifically District 1 here. So, what do you see as the most pressing legal or social issue currently facing District 1, and how can the judicial system play a constructive role in addressing that?
District 1, I think, has an issue that we have seen here. I'm not saying it's not relevant in other parts of the state. I think our whole state, to a degree, has seen this. But we've had a massive influx of individuals that are moving into our area that is unprecedented. Other states around the country aren't seeing the number of individuals relocating to their state like Idaho has, North Idaho in particular. So when we talk about District 1, we're talking about the 5 northern counties. North Idaho has seen a very large number of individuals and families that are relocating to our area, and with them, it brings a number of strains on our community. That's not to say it doesn't come without benefits. I certainly think that there are two sides to every coin. There are individuals that are moving here that are engaging in the workforce, are buying goods, services, homes. I think that certainly growth has the ability to be positive for the economy. So we're recognizing that, but we're also mindful that when you have that type of growth, oftentimes it can put a strain on local resources. When you have housing shortages, when you have infrastructure that now is being used at a higher rate than it was originally constructed for. And, in Shoshone County, we look around and we see, for instance, the Coeur d'Alene River Road, really good example of this, right? We've got way more traffic on that corridor than that corridor was designed for. So now we're talking about, are the roads falling into disrepair at a expedited timeline? Is there proper infrastructure for solid waste disposal? Is the access to rivers and parking and things like that local residents have enjoyed for decades, is that being diminished or taken away by individuals because of the amount of traffic that is being seen? So I use that just to highlight the reality that when you have this type of growth and you have not properly equipped your local infrastructure for it, it can put a strain on the system. And we take that and we apply it to the court system, and I think it's no different. When we look at our caseload in Shoshone County, we have seen a rapid growth in our caseload, so the number of cases that are moving through our jurisdiction. When you have that type of growth, all of a sudden you're having to schedule more court days. You need more personnel and more staff in the courthouse to accommodate that. The number of jury trials are going to go up. So now the number of days in which you've got to ask local residents to take off work, to report to the courthouse for jury duty, that's going to increase. And as all of these aspects of the criminal justice system attempt to adapt to the increased growth, I think that our court system really needs to take a closer look at saying, how can we improve the efficiency of our courts? In other words, we know that the amount of work is increasing, so how are we going to counteract that, or how are we going to keep up with it? And that's one aspect of this role that has frequently been on my mind as I've contemplated what my role on the bench might look like as we move forward and we try to adapt to this growth that we're seeing in the first district. I think our judges and our courts are going to have to be very cognizant, and there may be some adaptation that has to roll out. We may have to be creative about how we're able to maximize our resources so that way we can still keep up with the amount of work that's coming through the door without unnecessarily burdening our taxpayers.
Right, and I kind of want to talk a little bit more about being in District 1. So, of course, uniquely, us in Shoshone County and also in Kootenai County, we have I-90 running through our counties. Does that, specifically on drug trafficking, do you see a lot of those cases come through your court?
Yeah, so we do. I-90 certainly contributes to an increase in our caseload here disproportionately. So if you look at the crime statistics for drug-related crimes, Shoshone County has historically been near the top of the state almost every year. For drug-related crimes, Shoshone County oftentimes finishes in the top 3 for crime rate per capita. So per capita meaning based on the proportionality of the number of residents you have in your jurisdiction, what is your crime rates? So when you look at Shoshone County being at the top of that list, and then you actually analyze the types of cases that are coming through our door, which in Shoshone County, a disproportionate amount of them are drug-related cases, and then you tie that all together by analyzing where are these defendants coming from. So you start to look at, where is their place of residency. For most of them, it is not the Silver Valley. Right. For a lot of them, it's not even North Idaho, right? So we get a lot of criminal defendants that are coming through our system who are from, Spokane, who are from the Tri-Cities, who are from Missoula, who are from Oregon. And when you start to recognize that, I-90 does have this effect, you're put in a tough spot, because realistically speaking, by having an interstate that comes through our jurisdiction, in part, we want everybody to be doing their job. We want every city, town, and county that's on I-90 to be proactively addressing this issue, because if we all do, then I think we can put a significant deterrence on drug trafficking along this interstate corridor. And so through that lens, as a county, I think we're doing our job. I think we're doing what we need to. We're saying, hey, we recognize we have a interstate highway going through our county, and we're doing our part to say that when the drugs come through here and we detect them, we're getting them off the road, and we're putting the people behind bars that are responsible for that trafficking. Our hope is that everybody on the interstate is doing that, so we're all doing our part. If we didn't have the interstate coming through our county, I wouldn't expect our crime rate to be as high as it is, nor would we be in a position to really address it, right? So if we were in a rural jurisdiction that didn't have any interstate highways, the Shoshone counties of the world, wouldn't be fair for them to look at us and say, hey, what are you doing to address drug trafficking? They're going to say, well, it's not coming through our neck of the woods. So it's just the reality of what happens when you have an interstate traversing through your jurisdiction. And I think that as a county, we really have done a good job, especially in recent years, of playing our part in deterring drug trafficking through our jurisdiction.
So let's take a little bit of a shift here. You're, of course, running for district judge, but you're also a basketball official. So
yes, I am.
We'll talk a little bit about that. So you have also officiated youth sports for a long time. Shifting into your role as a sports official, what overlap do you see between being an official and being a judge? Also, second part of this question is, do you think that being an official might be able to help you in your journey as a judge?
So I think you and I probably first met in a gymnasium.
Oh,
And
I'm
you can
sure.
correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure that's probably where it traces back to. And fortunately, I like that that is where a lot of people know me from. If you've gotten to know me through my role as a prosecuting attorney, sometimes that's not always the best thing. Even though I've always strived to treat individuals who I encounter in my official role as a prosecutor with respect and dignity, the circumstances that bring people before me as the prosecuting attorney oftentimes are not good circumstances for them. So I get a lot of joy out of having opportunities to interact with the public in a different capacity, to interact with them as a coach, or to interact with them as a volunteer for the Rotary Club or Kiwanis or the NRA or Ducks Unlimited. Those are all things that are great outlets and give me an opportunity to give back to our community, to serve our community, and to do it in a capacity that, quite frankly, is one that I enjoy. Officiating is one of those, and officiating is probably the one that's the most akin to the types of decisions that I think judges have to make. That is, you've got a set of rules, and those set of rules serve as the baseline for the decision making. From there, you're analyzing a set of facts in the context of a basketball game. That set of facts are the plays as they're unfolding in front of you, right? You're looking at the conduct of players, and then you're identifying, is that conduct within the rules or is it outside the scope of the rules? And you have to make those decisions sometimes in a manner that can feel rushed,
Mm,
sometimes in a manner that is hostile, depending on which gymnasium you're in,
right.
and sometimes in a manner that you recognize is not going to be popular. And so I think that there's a lot of parallels between those two things. Judges are no different. They're going to be looking at a set of facts. They're going to be attempting to apply the law, and sometimes they've got to make game time decisions. They're going to be sitting on the bench. They're going to be presented with facts, and they might not have the ability to go back into their chambers and to analyze something through a lens, to do the proverbial video breakdown that we like to do in sports, right?
Yeah.
You don't get that opportunity all the time. And so you've got to make those decisions on your feet. You've got to be able to analyze those facts through the lens of the rules. And you've got to recognize that there are tough decisions that have to be made, and sometimes they're not going to be the popular ones.
And going off of that, of course, you don't have a student section yelling at you in a courtroom. That makes things a little bit tougher, a little bit more orderly in a courtroom. But what kind of similarities are there, like in sort of tension, emotion? What similarities are there in a gymnasium as well as a courtroom?
Yeah. I mean, perhaps you could say that the tension sometimes is a little bit delayed. You're right, in the courtroom, there is courtroom decorum that really governs how people are expected to hold themselves and act while they're inside of that courtroom. In a gymnasium, maybe it's a little less strict, maybe
Right.
not as easy to enforce. Certainly, I think that we do still have a degree of social norm within the gymnasium that we expect people to hold themselves to. And during the course of my officiating career, there has been more than one fan that has watched the remainder of a game from home. And so there is still a line that can be crossed. And as an official on a basketball court, when somebody does cross that line, you've got to have the confidence as an official to say, I'm willing to make the tough decision and I'm willing to stop this game until we can maintain order within this gym. In the courtroom, you're still going to have order that you're maintaining. I think people are more likely to understand the social norms within the courtroom and to abide by it, but that pressure is still there. Perhaps one of the ways that it's different is I think that your decisions on the bench as a judge, sometimes the response is just more delayed. Your response might not come in the courtroom. In other words, if you were on the gym, it might not come from the crowd section there. But the access to digital news media, the implementation of social media as primary outlet for individuals to voice their opinions, their concerns, all of that stuff is still very real. And, as a judge, I think that those decisions are still ones that the community is looking at, and I think the community still has an outlet to voice their pleasure or displeasure with those decisions. It just might not be inside of the courtroom.
Right. And in both law and sports, there is the letter of the law and intent of the law. So how do you balance sticking strictly to the rules versus understanding the context of each specific situation?
hmm This might be a question where we actually start to see a little more divergence between the two. So when we're discussing the role of a judge, I think the confines that a judge is bound by are much stricter, and the application of the law is of utmost importance.
Mm-hmm.
It is not the judge's role to make laws. Our legislature has that. It's part of the bifurcation of the duties between our legislature and our judiciary. And as voters, we elect individuals who, serve in our cities, who serve in our counties, who serve down in the state capitol in Boise, that pass the laws that govern how we want our society to conduct themselves. The judge's role is to take those laws and to apply them.
Mm-hmm.
As a sports official, I think particularly at the youth level, I would argue we wear two hats. One is the adjudicator of the contest. So, in one respect, you are taking rules, you're applying them to the game. But in another context, I think that you're also there as part of a larger process to develop young men and young women. And I think that that aspect of youth sports is maybe what sets it apart a little bit. As an official, one of the things that I'm analyzing when I step into a gymnasium or I'm stepping out on a field is, what does this game need from me today? Does it need me to manage this gym? Does it need me to simply make this a positive experience for the young man or young woman who's on the court today? And that's a continuum. That's a spectrum where every single game, every single contest is a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
There's certainly times when I walk into a gym and, we might put a call in the game in the first quarter. We might come right out the gates and we've got to travel. And then 2 minutes later, that same player gets the ball again and they travel again in the same way. And then 2 minutes later, they get the ball again and they travel in the same way. And as a crew, you start to recognize, hey, if I continue putting this call in the game, this game just isn't going to move.
Right.
The player will never advance the ball because they quite literally aren't developed skill-wise enough to adapt to the calls we're putting in the game. Maybe that calls for me as the official to take an opportunity during a dead ball or during a timeout to pull the player aside and to teach them why I'm calling a violation on them. Maybe I'm bringing them off the court and I'm showing them that, before you start a dribble, your back pivot foot has to maintain contact with the playing court, right? So you're teaching them about the rule, and through that teaching, you're hoping to develop them as a player. So you have that aspect of the game. And, so in one respect, it's part official. In another respect, it's part coach. In another respect, it might be part mentor. And I think you're trying to balance and adapt those rules in youth sports. So that way, at the end of the day, you're able to manage the game through the lens that you're trying to uphold the intent of the rules while still recognizing the bigger picture. And that bigger picture is that youth sports are for the growth and development of the young individuals in our society. I think as you start to move into the courtroom, those rules get much more strict. I think people's opportunity to have you wear more than one hat is much more removed. As a judge, in most instances, you're taking that law and you're applying it. Now, there's still opportunities for teaching, training, mentorship. Some of the best and most impactful moments I've had as an attorney have been moments where judges have pulled me aside after hearings and they've helped guide me in helping to navigate how those rules are intending to work. So I don't think it's lost altogether, but I do think that in youth sports, we do approach it from a different perspective. And through that perspective, strict application of the rules is much less important than it would be in the courtroom.
So let's talk a little bit more specifically about basketball. So you talk about game management a lot.
Hmm.
How, what strategies do you apply before the game, before you even take the court? What are you thinking about when you want to manage a game effectively?
So the first thing you've got to know as a sports official is what sort of game or contest are you anticipating having. So that's part of that pregame preparation. You're analyzing the teams. You're saying, hey, have I officiated these teams before? What's the level of skill? In other words, how strictly can I apply certain rules tonight and still have the game proceed forward with flow, with consistency? How can I manage this game so that this game is as productive as possible? I think that does have some analogy with the courtroom. The best judges are the judges that are going to be walking to the courtroom well prepared. They're going to know their case files. They're going to know the parties involved. They're going to know the types of objections that they're anticipating or the types of evidentiary presentation that's to be expected within a certain type of hearing. So I think that there's parallels there for sure. In the context of youth sports, we move forward and as you're analyzing how am I going to be able to manage this game, there's still a level of adaptation once you get out on the court. So you can do everything you want, and you should do everything to prepare yourself before the game starts. But you've got to have a degree of flexibility and fluidity to know that, hey, once I step out there on the court, I've got to be willing to adjust and adapt myself. I can't be so rigid that the game suffers. And that's something that's really helped me as a sports official over the years, and I think has improved the game for the coaches, the players, and the fans that have been a part of the contest that I've officiated.
Yeah, of course, there's going to be a difference between trying to help kids in a first and second grade game and then going to ref the CHS versus Lake City game.
Yep.
Gonna be a little bit different there.
Yep.
But kind of on the topic of CHS and Lake City and maybe even fight for the fish, on the court you have to manage coaches, players, and fans. What is your strategy for maintaining order and de-escalating tension during a heated game?
For me, one of the key aspects of being able to manage a game is rules-based knowledge. In other words, having confidence in what the rules say that govern the game and being able to articulate those and apply them. Officials are going to miss calls during the course of a contest. In fact, there was a statistic, I haven't kept updated on that statistic, but there was a statistic a few years back that I had seen, and it was a statistic that analyzed the call accuracy of back then it was the Pac-12. It analyzed the call accuracy of Pac-12 basketball officials. And the highest ranked Pac-12 official only had a 92% call accuracy, which meant that roughly 1 out of every 10 calls in the game he was missing. And that's the best official at a very high level of collegiate play. We scale that down, and we have a realistic perspective about likely where our high school officials are probably at call percentage wise. I don't know, maybe in the 70% range, somewhere along those lines. And so when we have that realization and we understand that, hey, as officials, there's an element of human error out on the court. You're going to be trying to analyze a play, but there's a good chance you may or may not get it right. Your view of that play is going to be an educated decision, and you've got to render an opinion based upon the information you have, i.e., the angle and the observations that you were able to make. You don't get the benefit of camera review. You don't get the benefit of, eagle eye angles like we get to see on TV now. Right. And so you've got to render an opinion. Do I think the ball handler was or was not illegally contacted? And that opinion that we're utilizing in order to make that ruling on the court is going to have that degree of human error that is just inherent in officiating. If we at least know the rules, I think it reduces the likelihood of error. So we start there. You have good rules knowledge that's going to reduce the likelihood that you are going to make an error on the court because of rules. So we start there. We then move to, all right, I've got a good understanding of the rules. Now I've got to play with the hand I've been dealt. This is the angle that I observed the play at. This is what may or may not have been blocking my view, so I might not have had the best view of it. Perhaps that play was 30 feet away instead of 3 feet away.
Mm-hmm.
So now distance is playing a factor. And then we're rendering an opinion. If that opinion isn't desirable to a coach or to a player, then there's a manner in which that decision can be addressed. As an official, I oftentimes will tell coaches during pregame, we'll do our pregame coaches conference, and I'll say, hey, if you got a question for us during the game about a call or a decision, come grab us during a dead ball. If the ball is live and moving around, I'm not going to be able to stop to talk to you because I've got to keep my focus on the game. I'm sure if you asked your dad, he's probably heard me say that before. And I'm sure if you asked any coach here in the first district, they would tell you that they've heard that from me during pregames. And that is because I want to be able to give them the time and respect that I think coaches and officials should give each other.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't do that if the game's moving, right? Because I've got to move on to the next play. So we start there with that pregame discussion. And then as the game goes on, if a coach has a question for me about a call that me or my crew has placed in the game, I want to make time to get over there. I want to listen to their concerns. And if they have a question about what we saw or what we did, I'm happy to answer that question. If they have a question about what the rule is, in other words, you called X, why is that the correct call? I'm happy to walk them through the rule as best I can within the time that we've been allocated during that dead ball. But at the end of the day, if the question is merely that you didn't like my judgment, there's probably not a lot to discuss there, right? I can't go back and change that.
Yeah.
There's no overturning calls in a basketball game. We don't have play review. And frankly, the reason why an official makes a call is because in their judgment, that was the correct call.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that the coach has to agree with them, but I think if coaches recognize that, hey, if an official put a whistle in the game, that's what they saw. So me taking time out of game to argue what their judgment was probably isn't going to be fruitful for either of us. And so, when you're able to have enough of those conversations as an official, you can pretty quickly differentiate the type or nature of that dialogue. In other words, am I being called over to have a conversation with a coach because he wants to have a rule explained? He wants to know what we saw or what we didn't see on a given play. He has a question about application. Those are all questions that are well in bounds and are fair game. If he wants to call me over, just tell me that he thinks I missed the call. I can tell that he thinks I missed the call already. I think I didn't miss the call, and that's why I put the call in the game. So there's just an obvious difference of opinion. Sometimes you can look back on camera and you can see, who was right or wasn't right, and sometimes it's the coach, sometimes it's the official. But once that call's placed in the game, I think you've really just got to understand that that call's been made, and you've got to look forward to the next play.
And when you're talking or you're discussing a judgment that you made or a call that you made, is there any difference in conversation when you're talking to a player about a call that you made and when you're talking to a coach about a call that you made?
I think both conversations start with a analysis of respect, right? So who's initiating that conversation, and are they initiating it in a respectful manner?
Mm-hmm.
If I've got a player that comes up to me and says, "Hey Ben, can you tell me what I did on this play?" I will make an effort always to answer that question. Once again, if it ball's live or something like that, I might tell them, "Hey, catch me the next dead ball," or "Hey, catch me the next free throw." But if they initiate that conversation with respect, I'm happy to have that conversation regardless of whether or not it's a player or a coach. With that said, I would say that there oftentimes is a difference in how coaches and players address officials. I'll have a contested play at the rim, and if the player's first reaction is to pop up off the floor, throw their hands up in the air, and say, "Where's the foul?" Probably not a very respectful way to address the official. In those instances, should that player expect or anticipate that they're probably going to have an official that wants to take time out to pull them aside and help walk them through why they did or didn't have a call? Probably not going to happen, right? So from a player's perspective, I just encourage players, hey, if you want to have the respect of officials where they're able to take time out to walk you through their decision making and their rule application, start those conversations in a respectful manner. And as long as you do that, I think the vast majority of officials are happy to have that conversation. That said, coaches aren't excluded. I think there are plenty of coaches throughout the state that have earned a reputation of being respectful. And I think if you ask officials, they'll say, hey, if we go into this gym and Coach so-and-so has a question, it's probably a legitimate question. I've refereed his games for 10 years. He's never belittled the officials. He's always respectful. And so if he has a question, it's probably a legitimate question. There's other coaches that have not earned that respect, and officials walk into a gym and they'll say, "Hey, every time I'm in this gym, all this coach does is just complain about our decision making. He tries to make a scene and incite the crowd when he doesn't like a call of ours." And so I think that element of respect is very much a part of the dialogue. And as an official, we walk into a gym every single night with the goal that we want that play clock to start and everyone has a clean slate. But we're also mindful of past interactions. It's part of our human nature. And if those past interactions haven't been positive or haven't been respectful, I think you're expecting the next one to follow suit. Doesn't mean that over time, coaches and officials alike don't grow and develop and mature. And I've seen plenty of instances, both on the coach and the official side, where individuals might start with a predisposition in one way, and over time, as they grow and mature, you start to see them settle down. You start to see them engage, interact with each other in a more respectful manner. And, that growth and progress is always pleasant to see, but it very much is a part of the game, and I think it does drive that dialogue.
And I wanted to talk about something that's probably the most discretionary for officials, and that's technical fouls. So at some point, it goes too far, and you have to assess a technical foul, whether to a player, a coach, or a spectator. If what is too far, and of course, there's some instances where, okay, you did that, I have to assess it right now, or it's over time, it's just kind of a buildup, and then the technical foul comes. So where do you kind of draw that line of when a technical foul should be assessed and when maybe you can let it go?
Great question. So we've got rules that serve as our baseline for what is or isn't conduct that rises to the level to warrant a technical foul. As officials, we should be operating within that section of rules, and we should be identifying whether or not those rules support a technical foul in any given circumstance. Game management very much plays a part in that. And when we're analyzing whether or not game management does or doesn't need a certain call put into a game, I think it can influence that decision making. To give you an example, we might have a contest that is it's a 2-point ball game, and a player engages in conduct that rises to the level of warranting a technical foul. And if we don't apply the rule in that instance, it very much could have an effect on the outcome of the game, right? So if, as an official, we say, we're not going to strictly apply this rule or use our discretion, right? So you're touching on elements of discretion. Is this conduct egregious enough that it rises to this level to warrant a technical? And within that element of discretion, if we don't adjudicate that rule strictly to the letter of the law, I think that we're placing a team at a disadvantage, and it could affect the outcome of the game. The same is true though on the opposite end. So I officiated a contest this last year, and this last season we had a team that was starting to pull ahead at the end of the game. By the time that we were down to the final seconds of the game, it was a 10-point ball game. So nothing that was going to happen in the last 10 seconds of the game was likely to change the outcome of that game. We started having fans that didn't like some of the calls that were made late in the game start to act inappropriately. According to the letter of the rule, by all means, those parents could have been ejected out of that facility, and it would have been wholly supported by the rule. That said, in order to effectuate that, we've now got to stop the game. We've now got to get game management or the SRO, so security officer, to now walk them up into the crowd, point out the fan that needs to be ejected. Now that fan's got to gather up all of their stuff, roll up their popcorn bag, close the lid on their Dr. Pepper, clasp up their bleacher seat. And meanwhile, everyone is sitting around in a gymnasium twiddling their thumbs, just waiting when the game is effectively over, right? And so in that instance, reflecting back on the specific game that's in my mind as I'm describing this, our crew came together with 10 seconds left in that game, and we all agreed there was about a half dozen different fans that all warranted an ejection at that exact point, and it was not going to help game management, and it was going to detract or take away from the players and the spirit of why we were there playing youth sports if we had stopped the game for another 5 minutes while court security started escorting fans out with 10 seconds on the game clock. So I think it comes back to game management, and I think that at the end of the day, when we're looking at strict application of the rules, which is one of the earlier questions that you touched on, and I think it parallels nicely in with this question. I think asking ourselves, does strict application of those rules help or hurt our ability to manage this game? In most instances, applying the rules as written is going to help game management, but there are some exceptions, and when you encounter those exceptions, you need to be in a position to adjust the way you officiate that game in order to ensure that game management doesn't suffer.
Yeah, I'm sure that the administrator at that specific game was thankful for no ejections, but can certainly be a headache from time to time.
Sure.
But
yeah.
Moving into a little bit of a coaching stint for you. So this year you volunteered to coach youth basketball, youth football, and assisted with putting on youth sports camps around the area. Is it difficult to switch hats from coach to official, or are you ever tempted to call the countless violations that you see when helping coach youth sports?
Yeah, that's a fun question. I alluded to it a little bit in one of my previous answers, and that is, I think as officials, maybe what we don't realize is that officials at the youth sports level oftentimes view themselves as, quasi coach, quasi mentor. And so I don't think there's a strict line between the two. I think that those lines are blurred a little bit. And even when I'm wearing the hat as a coach, I'm also still partially wearing the hat as an official, right? So I'm pulling my kids aside and I'm saying, hey, you don't talk to the official that way. If you got a question, come bring that to me. We'll discuss it. There's instances where I've allowed my players to go talk to officials. I have. But I want them to bring it to me first. I'm going to player come up and say, I've got no idea why he's rung me up on those travels. It's twice in a row now. And I'll look at it and say, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what he's seeing. So next free throw, just go ask him. So sometimes I've allowed it and I've authorized it. Sometimes the player will come over to me as a coach and he'll say, that's bogus. I got no idea why he's ringing me up for a foul. And I'm able to say, he's ringing you up for a foul because you're riding his hip all the way to the basket.
Yeah.
I don't care that the block up top was clean. You're redirecting the ball handler all the way to the hoop. And so, sometimes I'm pulling that player aside. I'm like, absolutely, do not go talk to the official. I'll tell you what you're doing wrong, right? And so I think we wear both of those hats to a degree at all times. For me, it's really not that difficult to transition from one role to the next. I think you just recognize that, hey, in this gym or on this field today, my role in the system is coach, or my role in the system is official. But I think everyone recognizes that there's some fluidity there, and that if we really want youth sports to maximize the impact it can have on kids, we need to be willing to embrace multiple roles at once.
So, as a coach, how important is it to you, especially coaching the first and second graders like you did for the YBL program? How important is it to build baseline understanding of the rules? And of course, we see you have to let a lot of things go,
Sure.
of course, or else we wouldn't even have a ball game. But how important is it to you to, one, help them understand the strategy of the game and what the goal is, and also to understand the rules that they're governed by?
Yeah, I think it's vital. I mean, obviously, kids are in such a moldable stage that you're discussing life lessons with them, not just rules about basketball or rules about football. You're teaching and developing patterns of behavior. To give you one example of what that looked like, I'll use YBL this last year. So we did coach YBL basketball. Got a group of kindergartners and first graders out there on the court, and I I ended up putting on some referee stripes because we didn't have a referee for that game. So I took off my coach hat, I put on my referee hat, and a kid from the opposing team gets the inbounds pass and proceeds to carry the ball on his hip as he runs up the court. Of course, we've got, you know, one or two parents on the sidelines that are giving me the visual signal that that should be a travel and it should be the other team's ball. And what I ended up doing is I ended up blowing my whistle, and I had to blow it about 10 different times before the kid realized that, hey, when there's a whistle, this means that I've got to stop.
Yep.
So I blew it about 10 times. We get the kid to stop, and then I actually put my arm around him, and I make him walk all the way back to the backcourt. And we started over, and we tried it again. And I actually inbounded the ball to him, and then I walked him through the fact that once you catch the ball, now we actually have to dribble it in order to get to the other side of the court. So we did a redo, right? No violation, no penalty. We did a redo on the play, walked the kid back, and the coach was on the other end of the court, and he was laughing, and came up to me afterwards and thanked me for doing that. And so, when we're talking about youth sports and we're talking about, what are these kids really learning out there? I think they're learning so much more than just rules and how to play a sport. I think they're learning lessons for life, and those lessons for life are ultimately what's going to make them successful members of our society someday in the future.
And real quickly, I just wanted to touch on what we were talking about before the podcast, how numbers for officials are better than they have been in recent years, but they're still low. So, what would you say as an official is the most, what's the best opportunity about being an official? What's the best thing about it?
For me personally, I love the fact that we're a part of a bigger system that's just giving back to the youth in our community. As a young kid, I learned so much from sports. It taught me so many life lessons, and it developed skills internally within me that I still apply today as a legal professional with a doctorate degree in law. Those life lessons are so vital to our youth, and youth sports wouldn't exist if we didn't have people in our society that were willing to wake up, put on their shoes, put on their boots early on a Saturday morning, travel out to a gym, even if there's nobody in the gym they even know, and say, I'm willing to help make this happen. For me, that's where it all started. That's why I started coaching youth sports. That's why I started officiating youth sports. And it's why I'm such a believer. Whether or not a kid decides to play, a structured team sport or do some other extracurricular activity, I think there's parallels all over for it. I was chatting with somebody recently that had a calling to teach music to young kids, right? So they're not necessarily going into a gymnasium and competing, but they're developing and they're learning skills, and that person is playing a bigger part as a society in helping that growth and that progress. So for me, I think it all comes back to, that element of service and saying, hey, what can I do to help the next generation so that this world around us can be a better place?
So we'll finish up on the topic that we started with. So we have roughly a month until May 19th, which is the primary election. What is one thing you want to leave our listeners and viewers with regarding this important judicial race?
Perfect. So great question to end on too. I think the aspect of this judicial race that's so unique and that a lot of people don't realize is that judicial elections for a vacant seat are actually really rare. So statutorily, it's the system that our legislature contemplated would be used for filling a judicial vacancy. But the rule has an exception, and the exception to the rule states that if a judge retires midterm, so before their term is up, so district judges serve 4-year terms. So if they retire before that term is up, then an appointment process can be used where a commission sits down, they analyze a pool of applicants, so individuals that are hoping to serve as judges apply for a position, and then ultimately the governor of our state selects who that judge is going to be. It's rare that a district judge actually retires at the end of a term such that it coincides with an election and that vacancy can actually be filled using the election process that was contemplated. In this instance, we have that opportunity. And so this is one of the very few times where voters in the first judicial district will actually have an election in order to fill a vacancy in a district judge seat. And it just so happens to be the seat that's here in Shoshone County. Now, one of the unique nuances of district judge elections is that district judges serve district-wide, meaning they're eligible to take case assignments in any of the 5 northern counties. Because of that structure, the legislature designed the rules so all 5 counties get to vote on that election. So even though this judge is going to be housed in Shoshone County, they'll serve and have a primary caseload with Shoshone and Benawa, because Benawa actually doesn't have a district judge.
Okay.
Their district judge is the Shoshone judge that travels down there. Voters in Bonner, Boundary, and Kootenai will have an opportunity to vote and ultimately, population-wise, have the controlling authority in the election to decide who's going to be serving in this role for Shoshone and Benawa counties moving forward. It's a unique structure because population-wise, Shoshone County and Benawa County, counties whom this judge will primarily serve, are a small minority of the total voter base. The voter base in the first judicial district now is over 250,000 people. And so it's really important that individuals here in Shoshone and in Benawa County who say, hey, this decision is really going to have an impact on us and our community. This is going to be the judge that for the foreseeable future is going to be making important decisions about evidentiary issues. They're going to be the ones sentencing individuals in heinous criminal cases, the type that rock communities, that are on the front headlines of newspapers. Those decisions are made by these district court judges. And that vote is ultimately a vote that lies in the hands of electors in all 5 counties. And so my encouragement to our voters here in Shoshone County and in Benawa County is to say, hey, if this is a race that's important to you, if you're invested in knowing who your next district judge is going to be here in our community, get out and spread the word. Share with your friends, family, colleagues in the other counties in North Idaho that this race is important to you, that this is the person that you think is the best person for this community moving forward, and encourage them to get out and vote, because an opportunity to go vote in an election like this isn't one that comes along very often, and it's something that we really should be taking advantage of as voters in the first judicial district.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. It was a pleasure having you on, Ben. I look forward to May 19th. May 19th, not only is judicial the first district seat on the ballot, but there's also a lot of other different things on the ballot. So make sure that you get out and vote. It's absolutely important for our democratic processes to make sure people get out and vote. So with that, this is we'll wrap this up, and yeah, it was a great having you on.
Well, I appreciate you having me, and I appreciate you doing this. I think it's so neat that you're out here leading the charge, that you're willing to, in a time like this where we've got elections on the ballot, you're willing to spearhead this and to take the reins and say, hey, I'm going to do my part to try to get information out to the community and to give people who are on the ballot an opportunity to speak and to share their hearts. So,
yeah, that's my goal with this. Is I think you're my first truly, well, not even political candidate, but I guess judicial candidate. And we talked about the levy a little bit in my last one, but this is the first. You're going head to head with another candidate, so we'll see how this pans out, and I'm really excited for it. It should be a fun election to watch. All the elections should be great, and I just hope everyone gets out and votes.
Yeah, you bet. Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
And to all the voters and listeners who are out there on the podcast, stay tuned on these podcasts. I think Cooper's got some fun stuff for you guys lined up moving forward in the coming weeks that deal with the election. And keep track of him, keep track of his podcast, and make sure you block off May 19th on your calendars.
Thank you.